We move into the secondary, which saw the biggest makeover out of all of these position groups. And I got to say, it showed in the spring. And if you were able to be out there for the spring, and we'll start with the corners, and then we'll kind of finish up with the secondary, with the safety group. But Charles Woods has been kind of lauded as the shutdown corner SMU hasn't had in a while. And going into 2022 season, he ends up playing just 4 games, which is what is allowing him to play at SMU this final season. But he was preseason All Big 12. And he's got that ability. He's got that edge to him. Quite honestly, when he was healthy, battled a concussion about back half of spring ball here at SMU. But when you look at what he did as far as being able to control opposing receivers, it was really difficult for SMU quarterbacks to look his way, which I think sometimes is the best attribute you could bring to the table as a corner. I think some of these guys, you still saw them go after them at times in spring, but with Charles Woods, you just didn't. I think somebody on the board kind of mentioned it, that we hadn't really heard about Charles Woods this spring. And look, I mean, I think he missed about a week of practice with that concussion in the back half, but that was early. That was early in spring when it was asked. And yeah, he was just steady. He was really good. He's played a lot of football over the course of his career. And if he puts it all together, he could be an all AAC guy and really change the way Scott Simons can call defenses. And the same goes for Chris Megginson, a guy who they know very well from Liberty. Ricky Hunley coached him. He's going into his final season of eligibility. And these two players really plug holes well. Obviously, SMU lost Sam Westfall, who just, I think the writing was on the wall. He's going to Virginia and finish out his career there. But they upgraded this position, and it was a position that needed it. And I think that when you look at these two corners that they've added, they've got some size and length to them. They've got some physicality. Chris Megginson really laid the wood a few times in spring ball on some players. So he's played a ton of football over the course of his career. These two are your starters. You have Jahari Rogers, who's going to be back this fall. You've added some other pieces, but I don't think there's any doubt that these are your two starting corners. And that is in itself off to a great start. And then you get into what SMU added for the future at the cornerback room. And Jalen Davis Robinson has plenty of speed. He had a couple breakups that were just, we haven't seen that. And he didn't play too much at LSU. He ended up redshirting. He wanted to come back home, does just that. But his ability to recover, and he's still kind of learning. He hasn't one of those guys that came out of Texas high school football and has played DB and done it for 6 years and has worked with a trainer. He's still kind of relatively new, but he has that incredible 100-meter time, and he's going to be able to develop this year. He'll get on the field, but he also doesn't have to play a lot. They've got AJ Davis. They have Kavaris Hall, who actually had a decent spring as well, entering his second season with the program. And like I mentioned, Jahari Rogers is coming back. But if you have Jalen Davis Robinson out there long-term at corner to pair him alongside whoever is there, you're looking at a bright future overall for this corner room. And I just think he made some plays this spring that you look at and they were wow plays. And so if he develops over the summer, maybe there's a chance that he gets into that kind of second spot to be first one off the bench. But AJ Davis has also had a good spring. And so that's maybe a question mark, but he just made so many wow plays that I think his future is so bright at SMU. And Keyshawn Mills is the sleeper of this group. And he's probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest sleeper out of all the transfer additions. Played at Little Elm High School, went to Colorado, had a Power 5 offer to, I think Liberty was one of his top schools. SMU defensive coordinator Scott Simons and cornerbacks coach Ricky Hunley recruited him while they were at Liberty, and he didn't play at all at Colorado. Obviously, that was a complete train wreck. And look, you'd like to have seen him maybe get on the field and find some time on one of the worst teams in college football. But he is somebody that needs to develop. He is somebody that they're looking at from a long-term perspective, and they really like what he brings to the table and brought to the table as a senior coming out of Little Elm. He's very productive. Is a guy that I think solidifies that plan to continue to address with Dallas area players as well. And he's a really, really good kid from what I understand. That was one of the big reasons why, because you look at what they brought in. They brought in 2 starters in Chris Megginson and Charles Woods. And they bring in Jalen Davis-Robinson. He comes from LSU, and he was a former 4-star. They're going to bring in Kyron Chambers, another former 4-star, Dallas area, state champion, went to TCU. So how's that going to go? Because like we said, they wanted to add another piece to the secondary, even as we knew Kyron Chambers was, going to end up coming in. Keyshawn Mills is a guy that just wants to kind of put his head down and work. And that was the big thing. So we'll kind of see. He hasn't played. He doesn't have much film, obviously, from college football. But he was productive as a senior at Little Elm. He was pretty under the radar, but On3 was actually highest on him out of all the services. But we'll kind of see how he puts it all together. He was one that will arrive this summer, as will Kyron Chambers, who the former Dallas South Oak Cliff star on that state championship team is coming in this summer. And I put him in this spot because we're about to transition to the safety room. Well, I think Kyron Chambers can play corner or safety. He's got big size for a corner. He's also got prototypical size for a safety. And he's got the speed to play both. He's got the physicality. So I'm intrigued to see what they do with Kyron Chambers, because when you look at this secondary, you've got Brandon Crosley and Jonathan McGill at the safety position that are entering their last season. Brian Massey has 2 more years. CJ Sanders, 2 more years. But Kyron Chambers comes in, and he's going to have 3 seasons to go. And he played in 5 games for TCU this past season, made a few tackles. I think he made a few tackles. And will come into the mix and immediately add size and physicality to wherever he plays on the field. And I think he's just, right now, between Ricky Hunley and Scott Simons, it's a good problem to have. Where do you fit Kyron Chambers in? And I think sometimes that versatility, and especially the way they talk about it with the safety room, is very important. Brandon Crosley had a great spring. Jonathan McGill, we know what SMU is getting in him. And CJ Sanders, certainly looks like a guy who, as he goes into the back half of his career, will play a lot of football for SMU at the nickelback spot. And CJ Sanders comes over with a lot of experience from Fresno State. And we saw him in the spring. And I think with CJ Sanders, he didn't necessarily have a ton of flash to him as far as his play, but he did have physicality. I think he made some really tough tackles. He made some big hits. So I am interested to see how he develops. And maybe it was Brandon Crosley standing out as much as he did this spring, but that is a good problem to have at the nickel spot for SMU. And now with CJ Sanders in the mix and potentially Kyron Chambers, along with Jonathan McGill coming over from Stanford, and Ahmad Moses coming back, and Isaiah Wacobia back, and Brian Massey coming back, you now have that ability to move those safeties around and make them play as if they're interchangeable, which is so important to Scott Simons. When we were talking with Craig Niver all the way back when he was still at SMU, one of the big things was this defense wants those safeties to be interchangeable. Now, they're going to have their roles. It's going to be a little, more defined than how I'm making it out to seem. But that is the big piece for this defense in terms of disguising. You knew last year that Brandon Crosley was going to play nickel, that Brian Massey was your strong safety, that Nick Roberts was your free. They get Ahmad Moses in there for Brian Massey eventually. He's got some size to him in a sense. He's short, but he's thick. And this is where it's going to be interesting to see how this group performs overall, because they can move all those guys around. So the secondary, you get an A. There's no doubt about it when you look at what they were able to put together.